with Agile, I think it was like back in 2006, maybe. And since then, in addition to managing projects, well, I implement um, project management processes, nowadays mostly either hybrid or agile. I've been engaged with the main organizations uh, that are establishing project management frameworks, both the PMI and the Prince2 standards. XPM always asked me if I can briefly introduce the company. So the company was created back in 2006, became accredited by PMI in 2008, and then became accredited as a global provider 2010, and then 2014 accredited for ITIL. ITIL is IT Service Management Framework, and then accredited for Prince2, both conventional and hybrid courses. In addition to these monthly webinars, we run on-site workshops. We offer a bunch of templates. You can look them up on our website. We also run a number of blogs, including Agile-related blogs, and we also have a YouTube channel. That's the Project Management Station. Feel free to look for videos. There's a number of them that you might be interested, including on the topic of how to scale Agile. I've published a few books, and this is actually not up to date. I just very recently published a book on the topic of Agile project management. And we have a number of different courses. On the Agile topic, we have, for example, I'm just struggling to try to see, okay, so including a Scrum Master entry level and advanced level, Scrum Product Owner, Agile Project Management. If you are a project manager for an Agile or hybrid course, the project, and Agile Practitioner, if you're a team member or you are leading a team and you want them to master Agile practices, not specifically related to any specific framework. Agile Leader, if you are leading and or overseeing Agile teams. If you want a credential and you're looking for the PMI ACP, that's the Agile Certified Practitioner credential. We have that course as well, Scaling Agile, how to scale. That's the very purpose of this session today. SAFe, which is you're probably familiar with. It's a Agile at Scale framework. And then credentials, different ones, European Certified Agile Project Manager, European Certified Agile Coach. Of course, on the PM project management side, the PMP, that's the probably the most well-renowned project management credential. The CAPM, which is of course the PMI entry-level credential for risk management, the British, both the foundation and the practitioner credentials, and the European Certified Project Manager. If you're not really looking for a credential, there's a number of different designer should use that feedback to adjust the product backlog accordingly. That feedback might be, oh, that was really cool, but what I would really like it was to do some enhancement, or has been some trend in the market that we should address. So this is the whole idea that why do we run iterations? Because we want to iterate, so we want to learn and adapt. And the sprint ends with a retrospective, which is an opportunity for the team to inspect their practices by discussing what went well and what could be improved, and is there some improvement actions that the team can undertake. So, and once the sprint is over, then immediately another sprint begins. So you're running back-to-back sprints. Um, so, so the team would have, if using Scrum, those 5 events that I just briefly introduced, the container event, which is the sprint, and then the 4 events in between, within, and then the 3 artifacts, the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and increment. If you're using Scrum, then you'd probably also use terms such as product goal, sprint goal, and definition of done, which is are used to overcome a challenge, which is how do you combine focus with flexibility? How do you make sure that at the end of a sprint, or at the end of a release, or at the end of the product, you have a meaningful product that you address meaningful outcomes, but uh, at the same time, you want the team to be able to adapt. So you want the flexibility to adapt, but you also want the making sure that you don't drift too far away, that the team does not have an erratic evolution. You know what you don't want. You don't want to use a full detail upfront understanding, because one, the team is not able to do that, and two, it would become obsolete anyway, so it would be meaningless. So instead, you want to have these commitments would provide an overview and high-level sense of direction, but not really a formal commitment. And each artifact would have its own commitment. So you have the product goal, which would be the commitment for the product backlog, the sprint goal, which would be the commitment for the sprint. They're very similar. They would describe in a business terms, so in terms that the business will be able to understand what the product or the sprint should be able to fulfill. So what will be the ultimate outcome? And then each increment should align to the definition of done, which should describe the state of the increment once once the sprint is over. Okay, so that's the one scenario, which is one product, one team. Often, or with it rather said, with increasingly common is to have the need for multiple teams to be working on a single product. Well, maybe you are implementing an ERP and it's far too complex to have one single team, or developing a large complex system. So, or restructuring all the business processes at once, and multiple teams have to be on deck working. So you now need to have multiple teams, and the reason is self-managing teams, which are collaborative by nature. So they are empowered to work to make all they should be able to make all the product-related decisions, and they are collectively accountable for their decisions. And that basically means that they should work as a cohesive, tight unit, and that's not really compatible with having a 30 individuals team. That's not really possible. It just became, after a certain threshold, just purely chaotic. So different frameworks might establish a different threshold, but 10, let's say it's a reasonable amount. It's not written in stone, but beyond a certain point, it's not really possible to have a self-managing collaborative team, because you would feel the need to have a focal point or a team manager or someone just to contain complexity. So, but if you want to maintain the principle of having a collaborative, self-managing team, then you will need several teams. Um, and new challenges will immediately start. So, who's doing what? And so, how do we segregate the work across teams? So, and how do different teams work together? Because often there are interdependencies across features which might be scattered across teams. And those dependencies might exist across sprints. So you might be influenced by something that was completed in the previous sprint or even the same sprint that other team is doing. Sometimes the solutions must be discussed in a collaborative way across teams. And keep in mind that you just have one single product. So you need to demonstrate and you need to integrate the product. You should have compatible quality parameters. So there are now different challenges that you wouldn't have otherwise. Sometimes what you have is something different, which is I don't have multiple teams, it's just one team, but Anna or John or Paul that are working on my team are also the ones on this product, are also the ones that are helping to maintain or develop another product. So often the resources are scarce and you have to share them with other initiatives, which basically means that for once, you don't have a fully allocated team. And second, sometimes you don't even know exactly what is the resource allocation that you can account with, that you can work with. That creates different challenges. It's not a question of dependencies across features, but it's a question of first productivity, because people that are not fully allocated are not as productive as fully allocated teams. Sometimes you're just waiting for people that should be here and aren't. And sometimes you can't really have an expectable allocation of resources because, well, sometimes people are just firefighting and, I don't know, addressing some urgent defect correction, and that's not really predictable, which basically means that sometimes it's just really tough to meet the sprint goal because your capacity is not really predictable. You don't really know how many resources do you have. That it's really challenging, and if possible, don't do that. That I know that's one quite easy and also silly suggestion. But if possible, try to segregate responsibilities in terms of teams that work, for example, developing stuff, developing complexity, addressing complexity that you can slice in sprints. And if you have teams that are basically firefighting, for example, responding to urgent requests, they can work with Kanban in a different approach, in a different discipline with different rules. Well, if that is possible, that is perfect. When that is not possible, then you might contain it, say, for example, having a predictable capacity. So you know that you can only account, for example, with 30, 40, 50% of your resource allocation. Okay. On the right-hand side, you have chaos because you have multiple teams working with multiple products. And there's just, so you have complexities coming from every side. So you have interdependencies across teams, across sprints, uneven resource allocation, unpredictable resource allocation. Good luck. There's just you may try to mitigate the damage, but it's about managing losses. Okay, so we'll focus today basically on the second scenario. Multiple teams working on the same product. And that can be, depending on the scenario, you can use typically for, okay, so a large overall team scattered across smaller teams within the same products, working, for example, modules of a product. You can also apply it for a program that has related projects, and you can use partially things within an agile at scale framework, and also partially within managing a portfolio. You can use some topics that we'll discuss on how to organize how to set up the organization to address agile at scale challenges. And those frameworks should provide insight on how to address the work, and also how to enhance, establish roles and responsibilities, organize, establish the organization as different, to develop competencies, and to interact with other teams. Okay, so typical challenges are, can we reorganize teams so that we can more easily work as an independent unit, so that we are not as relying as much on other teams? Is it possible to have a more cross-functional team with all the expertise required to make a fully completed product increment? And that might require, for example, developing competencies, trying to cross-train individuals, partially sharing resources across teams until other team members become more autonomous. But that's one of the challenges. Another one is, can we reorder product backlog items in a way that items are less impacted by other product backlog items? So is it possible to refine the backlog in a way that we have less dependencies? And is it possible to have working rules that help us to work across different teams? There are a lot of frameworks for that, and I will not focus the session on those. I will refer to them, but I will not focus on any specific framework. So, for example, you have SAFe, Scrum of Scrums, Less, Discipline, Agile. Some of them are full frameworks. Some of them are a lot more like practices. It's a little bit of a stretch to say that Scrum of Scrum is a framework. Not really. It's more like a practice. But anyway, there are very comprehensive frameworks that will clearly explain how to. Then they even provide you with a set of documentation that you might use, and some of them is just cool practices that you can help you to address relatively simple scenarios. In no way it's a promotion of Less. It's just that I think they are representative. If by using their events, you can understand challenges, and you can then, in your specific situation, choose another framework, and some of them are as good as Less. So this is a high-level view of Less as an acronym for large-scale Scrum, and you can see the back-to-back sprints as Scrum would have, and the one advantage of using Less as a baseline, because it's built upon Scrum, and since Scrum it's well known, it's good as a starting point. So you will see there are sprint planning events, and then the sprint itself, and then you see very similar terms to what you would normally see on Scrum. And if you are familiar with Scrum, you see something that is odd. You see sprint planning 1 and 2. Well, I didn't know there were 2 sprint planning events. So there are slight modifications. You can think as Less as an add-on. So it's bringing add-on additional events and slightly fine-tuning the existing events. The Nexus framework is relatively similar, also a nice add-on for Scrum. So let's drill down. So as Scrum would, you will start with a sprint planning event. So, but you will not have one event. You actually can have two. You can have a overall sprint planning event that should be able to answer questions such as um, which team will do each item. So again, keep in mind that you have one single product, so you should have one single product backlog. So one of the decisions that you need to address, which you wouldn't in a single team scrum, would be which team will do which item. Um, and you also need to discuss how will different teams coordinate themselves. So if they are working on related items, which they often will, so you will need to distribute items across teams, but you have one single product. So there's a lot of functional and technical interdependencies across them. So you need to, sometimes you need to discuss, for example, at this overall sprint planning, some uh, uh, common definitions of solutions that will then be used, taken as an input for each individual team. And you also need to discuss how you're going to reorganize work within the sprint. Within each team, they will have their common sprint planning event, as you would normally have in a single team scrum. So they will need to answer questions such as why, what is the goal for each sprint, what is the forecast of items, and how are they planning to do. Um, you can decide in the sprint planning event, typically you'd have representatives, one or more from each team, and then you would have each single team working together at the sprint planning 2 level. And you can also, if needed, have cross-team discussions when and if facing challenges. Um, and that's what I mean. So the sprint planning event is similar to traditional Scrum. So each team prepares its own sprint backlog, forecasting the items and planning how they aim to achieve the sprint goal. Um, in a single team Scrum, you would have product backlog refinement, or any agile team would have, for that matter. You need to make sure that the product backlog is ready to support the upcoming sprints. So when we use the term product backlog refinement, we are expecting two things. One, because it's an iterative approach, feedback from the previous sprints should be used to adjust the product backlog accordingly by adding, removing, adjusting, re-estimating, reordering the existing items. So sprints are there for a reason: to iterate, to inspect and adapt. So product backlog refinement is an opportunity to incorporate that knowledge that was acquired in the previous sprint reviews to adjust. And second objective, because it's an iterative approach, things are not fully committed up front. So you need to make sure that the items that will be completed in the next 2 or 3 sprints are ready to be implemented. So you would probably split large items into smaller ones, and you add sufficient detail. You make sure that the items are free from any dependency, and whatever else you may need to come up with some design artifact, or make sure that there's a common architecture, whatever you need to do. And of course, depends on whatever product you are developing, to make sure that the item is ready, that the team can pick up the item and work on that. So that's irrelevant whether you are at scale or not. So how do you adapt that to an at scale scenario? Les is proposing that you may have 2 or 3 different events. One, and I will not start from the top, I will start from the middle. You may have a multi-team product backlog finance session where representatives from the different teams will work together to make sure that the items are ready. So they will work together um, to make sure, because there are dependencies, so they try to make sure that each team has their items, that dependencies are dealt with, that the size is appropriate, that things are organized in a way that the team is not too reliant on other teams. So that's the session on the middle, multi-team product backlog refinement. Um, it is possible that even if you have that multi-team session, that your as one or more specific teams might also need to have their own session. And Les is also suggesting that when needed, especially for very large projects, maybe dozens of different teams, they might need a very lightweight session just to quickly organize, especially, for example, if you have a large product with multiple areas and each area might have multiple teams. So you might have a quick session just to spread, distribute things, and then you might not need that in every session, and then drill down to the second layer. Um, Scrum will have a daily Scrum event to provide transparency, pick your own format, but for example, answer questions such as what have we done today or yesterday, what we will do today, and is there an impediment? Um, if you made different teams may send representatives or scouts. So one of possibility is why not just send someone just as an observer? If you want something more structured, you may hold a Scrum of Scrum events or event or Meta Scrum where you have ambassadors from different teams to meet with the ambassadors with other teams to just to focus on those cross-team links. So things that concern different teams, might be technical related, might be communication related. So just to focus not on their overall progress, but just on the matters that are relevant across boundaries. Um, you can use other stuff, but just pick up the phone and talk. You can send scouts to work, sitting side by side on things that are related. You can hold community of practices just for to discuss, for example, best practices that might be relevant. And here's just a reminder that Agile at Scale frameworks are not exclusively focused on making sure that the product is a success. They're also focused on how to develop competencies and how to spread knowledge across teams. And that's why I said that partially Agile at Scale was also relevant for portfolio management. Some of these would not be relevant for portfolio management. But when you say that you're also helping to share knowledge across the organization, this bit is relevant. You can hold additional cross-team meetings that are not formally recognized, but hey, it's your choice on how you decide to. So these frameworks will not prohibit you from having additional events that you feel are helpful. Um, Another challenge that you have is you have one single product. And at the end of this session, you will still need to have um, a sprint review event or a similar term where the different teams will have to demonstrate one single product. And the whatever the teams did should be fully done. We have said this before, but it also has to be fully integrated because you don't really want a fragmented product. You don't want that the different teams to hold their products in different environments, whatever your product is. Uh, it has to be fully integrated. That means that you probably need to have first a common understanding how to integrate things, and you probably need to have people that will have to work together to make sure that they integrate whatever they did in a compatible way, that's not uh, impacting other teams in a unexpected way. Um, that's probably required to have standards to how to integrate and if using for software, you're probably automating tests, and if you're working with uh, robotic systems, or you probably would have need to work differently. Uh, but the challenges are the same. Another challenge that you have, and I just briefly said that before, is that different teams will need to have that same understanding of what it means to do things properly. And if you're using Scrum, then you're probably familiar with the term definition of done. And the definition of done would be the state of the increment at the sprint review, or in other words, what does it mean to do things fully done? What does it mean to what are the stakeholders expecting from the team when they interact with your product? So you have a checklist of what does done mean. Um, some frameworks introduce the term shippable or releasable. So if done means, what does it mean for things to be fully complete once the team is finished with those items? Releasable or shippable means, what does it mean to be usable, to be potentially releasable? What does it mean to be in a state that you could potentially release to those that actually use? In a perfect world, those would be the same. In the real world, you would have the need to have a external quality assurance test to a testing team, or you have the need for the team to travel to the factory location where you would need to install and train people, or you need to accumulate enough features so that this will be market viable from the market standpoint to promote and release. So there's always there's often a gap between done and releasable, and some frameworks are encouraging the teams not only to have a done meaning but also a shippable meaning, and work to try to minimize the gap between done and shippable, but keep your eyes open and to have making sure that that is fully transparent. Um, and the sprint ends with a sprint review and then immediately after a retrospective. And here you just have one product, so you just have one single sprint review. You can, if possible, have a venue that enables you to have, for example, different teams working in different locations, so that stakeholders can walk around and sit with the teams to interact with the product. And maybe sometimes they would just work together and converge to one single demonstrator with maybe two or three demonstration with maybe two or three teams. Yes, because the you have one single product. So for example, to test a workflow, you might need to test maybe the invoicing team and the payment team may need to work together to show how a full workflow of processing and paying an invoice would look like. Um, and for retrospective, uh, while it does make sense to have a single team retrospective that, as usual, would focus on discussing what went well and what could improve, you may also feel the need to have an overall retrospective where you either the representatives or even whole the team members would just focus on discussing topics related to interaction across teams, which probably a good idea. Um, okay, shifting the topic from how to work to how to organize. Um, regardless of the scenario, single team or multi-team agile, you would have a set of individuals that should be self-managed, so they are empowered to make all the product development decisions. That means that you have someone that is fully mandated to manage the product backlog, and you have development team or delivery team or a single term or a similar term that they are fully mandated to manage what they can deliver within a sprint. So they have the power to forecast, and they will decide which items can be done and how they will be done and who's doing what and whatever. So they are self-managed. And Agile will always encourage the teams to be dedicated and long-lived. And dedicated means whenever possible, fully allocated 100%. So you don't try to avoid as possible a team that is scattered across projects. And long-lived, it is just a sensible way to say you want a high-performing team that is fully accountable and with a common sense of team, and it's much easier to do when they are used to work together for a long time. Um, you want to avoid phase-based allocation, or you want uneven resource allocation, again, to maintain a, a predictable workload, to be easy to forecast for the future, and also to help to strengthen the ability to work together. You also want that team to be cross-functional, and if that is true for single team Scrum, it's become even more important for Agile at scale. If you have um, working with different modules of one system, you need multiple teams, and the teams are distributed. So you have component teams, for example, that work with database or back office. So so if you have teams that are specialized in different functions, instead of having all the expertise required to develop a certain feature, then complexity just significantly improve because you will have dependencies across different components. For example, those with the skills to develop one architectural layer of the product, and you also have dependencies across, for example, different modules. And complexity just significantly improve, and also agility significantly decrease because it will take a lot of time for the user to be able to experience the product and for the stakeholders to be able to provide feedback. And it probably would make more sense to say the other way around. Agile will also always encourage you to have feature teams. And by feature teams, will mean that we will have all the skills required to develop working features. And I know that sounds relatively similar to a cross-functional team, and it's kind of is, but by moving from the threshold of asking for cross-functional teams to feature teams, you actually asking for the team to be able to have working features at the end of each sprint, so that features, things are fully done and are usable, and stakeholders can immediately provide feedback at the end of each sprint. Okay, so just shifting things around. So I've mentioned cross-functional, I've mentioned self-managed, self-lived. Often people are scattered across projects, working from different locations, and sometimes just simply unavoidable. But some things are more risky than others. So ideally, people will be fully collocated in a single location. It will probably be easy to communicate and synchronize their progress. Often that's not possible. They are distributed, or are they dispersed? And some recognizing that's just reality of nowadays. If people are working from different locations, but they do have the opportunity to every now and then synchronize and maybe work on more creative stuff on a regular basis working together. There is one thing, if they are working in different countries, across different time zones, that's a whole different matter. Uh, and never or just rarely having the opportunity to work together. So remote, complicated teams contain dispersed teams and whenever possible, avoid distributed teams. Um, okay, let's focus on roles, accountabilities. Um, on Scrum, you would see a product owner, a developers, and a Scrum Master. Let's just add an additional role, the manager. Um, Nothing changes when you have Agile at scale. You need one single product owner accountable for the product success, accountable for maximizing value, for being the interacting with stakeholders, making sure that the the product is compatible with the environment. So bringing that environment expertise for the team. If you have a very large product, you might need sub-product owners or area product owners, but at the end of the day, you will also need someone that will be fully accountable for the product as a whole. You need a Scrum Master. True that if you have multiple teams, you might need several Scrum Masters. For example, each Scrum Master helping up to 3 teams, but each team would have its own Scrum Master, and then you need a manager, someone who will be there to overcome challenges, to remove obstacles, so that you can escalate to make sure that resources are available. Because we recognize that developers and even the Scrum Master reach is limited, so you need help. If complexity is just the number, the just the reality, it's not an exceptional thing, then having an permanently available manager would help to overcome those challenges. Um, Final topic of today, I'm just moving away from how to organize a team to how to organize an organization. So how an organization can be set up to address agile at scale challenges. And I will use terminology which was very specific or is specific to a specific organization, Spotify, but I don't mean it as a recommendation or just because this terminology is useful to discuss challenges that any organization can have, regardless of whether they choose to use all of these groups and these specific names. Um, you need teams, cross-functional teams that are there to develop features. You may say Scrum team, you may say squad, but a cross-functional Scrum team or a squad is typically a small team focused on a set of features, um, working with the product owner in a relatively contained set. But for large products, you need multiple teams working together. You can use different names. Some organizations just say a tribe to address multiple teams working on related features. They are typically related to one single product. Um, then you also might need a name for people with similar skills and competencies, such as front end, quality assurance, whatever, and that might be relevant for knowledge management purpose, for developing competencies, for training, for developing standards, for sharing both tacit and explicit knowledge across people. And you might also need to have a more informal organization where different people may meet as a community of practice or interest to share knowledge, um, to join events where they can informally meet to discuss and share how to work. Those are not, again, mandatory or but those are challenges that an organization might have when developing agile at scale competencies. So I was trying to open enough room to have at least 10 minutes at the end for should you have questions. So that was my um, pitch for today is promoting agile at scale. While I'm waiting for your questions, we run on Trustpilot, which is a kind of quality assurance too. Um, we have feel free to drop a review on us, so you can look us on Trustpilot XPM as part of our quality assurance purpose. I'm also sharing my email should you have questions later and you feel more comfortable sending an email. That's my name, Enrique.more at XPM Consulting. Okay. So once again, we have these webinars monthly. You can also check on us on our blogs. Crystal, should you have questions, feel free to ask. You can either use the microphone or chat functionality. So anyone should, if you have questions, feel free to ask. If not, thank you for joining. Next webinar will be next month. I'm sure it will be Agile related, not sure the topic at the moment. You're
Queria
most
só
welcome
agradecer,
to.
Henrique, só agradecer pela apresentação também. Muito obrigado. E uma boa noite.
Boa noite. Thank you all for joining. You're welcome. Obrigado, António. I have a question. Crystal, hi. Good to be here. I'm Daniel. So I've supported teams that were newly introduced to Agile and hadn't fully grasped it yet. So a big part of my role was accelerating their understanding while guiding them through the transition from waterfall to Scrum. That's great. One thing I found was that building psychological safety was just as critical as introducing ceremonies and metrics. In your experience, what are the most effective ways leaders can reinforce psychology safety while scaling Agile across multiple teams? And what signals tells you an organization is truly ready to move beyond team level Scrum into broader scaling frameworks? Okay, so there's two separate questions there. The first is focused on psychological safety, and the second on enhancing competencies and moving from agile at single team to multiple teams. Let's focus on the first question. So I would say that my favorite way is to have either a team charter or team contract with a set of rules on how we should behave. So enable teams to work and come up with a set of values and team agreements and what are acceptable and unacceptable boundaries. I don't think this is specific to an agile at scale, but it's definitely something that can either can inhibit or block progress. So having each sprint, the team has an opportunity to discuss their set of values and have for each value one or more acceptable or non-acceptable behaviors, and make sure that if particularly those that have a leading role set the example. Do not enforce, but set the example. For the second, which I would say that you have and just this definitely not a scientific answer, but we are trying to promote an iterative and incremental approach. So let's use an iterative and incremental approach. Let's try to, why not work in a small set of the organization and work iteratively, um, implement there, see what works, adjust. Then maybe shift some resources to other teams to help to spread the knowledge and try to grow by adding additional layers of agility and keep spreading, adding more teams. Not sure if that was the question, but to spread, I would say keep adding additional slices of agility. Don't ask for too much on the first experiments, and don't try to do it at the organizational level. I would say try to build it locally and then keep spreading and keep adding at the same time. So spreading incrementally, adjusting iteratively. And to know that the organization is ready. Probably additionally, and I'm sure that you have far more information than I do, but making sure that you have enough support so that senior management is on board and promoting the change, especially once the first experiments were done, because it's far simpler to do it very locally as a small team. But once you try to roll out to the organization, then sponsorship is really important and to make sure that everyone's on board with the change. Uh, Probably a good idea to have some local champions, people that are helping you to promote, so they're not alone pushing for the change. Not sure if I helped. It's a has a lot of different ways to pick up to address that. My colleague just shared a list of future webinars. That's great. You're most welcome, Giovanna. You're welcome, Ines. You're most welcome, Crystal.
Henrique, I was
Thank
just
you
going
all.
through the list of webinars shared, and I think there's an issue with the button for registering on the next webinars. Or is it closed until we're closer
It,
to the
sh-
date?
it shouldn't. So
Oh, okay.
I'll try to address it. Make sure that tomorrow that's addressed. So
Perfect.
you're
Thank you very
saying on the
much.
website, it's not working on the website. Was that it?
Y- Yeah, so once I click each webinar and I see register for the event, it says to register for this event, please visit the following URL, but then there's a warning, undefined property, and then it's HTML code.
I'm sorry. I'll make sure that's addressed tomorrow.
No problem. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you next time then.
Bye. See you.
Bye bye.